October 31st, and you are on the Gravity Project community meeting. We will just go through some really quick administrative items for those of you who have not been on these calls before. We do record these and we post them to Confluence after the meetings. So everyone is muted on entry to keep background noise to a minimum. But when we open it up for questions and answers, you are more than welcome to unmute yourselves. And if you have trouble with that, just chat us and we can manually unmute you. If you have questions or comments during the presentation, please use your chat feature and send it to everyone. You should be able to hover your cursor over the bottom of your screen and there should be a little bubble, like a talk bubble, that's your chat. And if you send it to everyone, then other members of the community can also help address it. We've had some really great discussions via chat the last few weeks, so that's very useful. Next slide, please. If you have not already joined the project, please do so. You can do that on Confluence, and you can be an other interested party or a committed member. You can pick one and be somewhere in between. We appreciate all levels of participation, but joining the project will put you on our email distribution list. So if you're not currently receiving emails from us, it's probably because you haven't joined the project, and we would love to have you. So please take a moment to do that, and you can also zip around the Confluence to learn more about the project. And Lucy, yes, we can show the homepage here later in the call. That would probably be helpful because we do realize we have some new members joining these calls. And thank you for the suggestion. Don't let me forget to do that, okay? I probably will not remember. Next slide, please. We will go through some CPT updates. Sarah's going to lead you through most of this call today, and then through the end-to-end comment review and a recap of the food insecurity choice points, and then we'll go through next steps. Slide, please. And then I think, Sarah, you can take it away from here. Oh, wait. Yes, let's review this very quickly on the 31st of October today. And we are working through our end-to-end review working sessions for the Food Insecurity Data Set. And thank you all very much for submitting your feedback thus far. And we are still looking forward to receiving feedback from all of you through November 7th. So even if you think you're late with it, go ahead and turn it in. We don't mind. We will accept all submissions until that date, whether it's screening, diagnosis, goals, or interventions. Next slide, please. These are the next few upcoming weeks. We will look through end-to-end comment dispositions to date next week. And then the 14th, we will give you an overview of how to vote in the consensus voting process. And that will be open through December 1st. So you'll have plenty of time, even though there's a holiday in between. You'll have a good 3 weeks to vote on data concepts. Sorry, I'm being told that my microphone is faint. I will get closer. And then we have a holiday the 28th. We don't have a meeting the first week of December because we're going to be working internally to reconcile consensus votes and comments. And then our last meeting of the year is the 12th of December. Next slide, please.
Okay.
Hey, thanks.
Here we go. This is this is Sarah DeSilvi from rural Vermont. We had some really wonderful comments on our question regarding CPT, and already some really lovely questions about the screening, goals, diagnosis, and intervention frameworks we presented over the last couple meetings. And all those questions seem so important that we wanted to open them up to everyone to have a community discussion on. So the rest of this meeting will be hopefully a kind of mini seminar so that we can collectively come to consensus on some things that community members have raised and go collectively forward. The first thing we're going to present on is an update on CPT. And again, to the AMA, I don't think the registered trademark is on this slide, but it is there in other slides, so I apologize. So at the last meeting, we sent out a directive to ask the community and the steering to case management CPT and send in comments. We had some really lovely comments in return, and a lot of them gave us quite a bit of pause. So the most pressing one was kind of the Pandora's box of including case management CPT, because that would open up the possibility of needing to include all evaluation and management coding for other professions. And then there was some other comments really about what CPT is able to define claims and whether it was even the best option for carrying the specificity of food insecurity activity. So we asked ourselves what carries meaning in CPT, and it's not the presence of the CPT really that carries the meaning. It defines the billable service. It's when you pair CPT to an ICD-10 CM, and this is like professional CPT. This is different than screening CPT or procedural CPT. But when you pair professional CPT to ICD-10 is where you have the meaning. And for example, we have our proposed Food Insecurity ICD-10 CM code of Z59.42. So when you couple that with an evaluation and management code, you know what that E&M code was surrounding. We do use CPT to define specific screening activities and claims, and we do this all the time. For instance, with quality metrics regarding developmental screening, it's represented in claims by the 96110. And so we basically had a question that we wanted to propose to all of you. Understanding the Pandora's box of including possibly all professional CPT, if we include case management and care management CPT, we want to know if we should let that domain of CPT go and focus on the CPT that represents the activities of food insecurity screening and food insecurity assessment. These are the codes that have been submitted that surround that domain. There's specific support for 96160 and 96161 on health risk assessment CPT. We worked with the AMA 2 years ago to verify that that was an appropriate CPT to drop in the presence of validated and standardized food insecurity screening, and these other codes were submitted by our community members. So if we did so, that would be in alignment with previous decisions we've made to use only the most theoretically related concepts. So this is a question to the community, and you can either raise your hand or put a question in chat whether we feel like that's a good direction to go in. Any thoughts?
Yeah, and just a reminder, this is Evelyn to everyone. If you are muted, unmute yourself and go ahead.
Sarah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, I'm sorry. Could you repeat again about 96160 and 96161? Did you say that those were dropped or validated with the CMA?
Well, so what I mentioned was that a couple years ago we worked to verify that when the 96160 and 96161 codes came out, that they could be applicable for standardized food insecurity screening.
Okay, thank you.
And there's a question from Ned. It seems like one consequence would be that that using a screener like Prepare or the AHC would mean that you would have to code a CPT for every domain that was asked about. And I think the idea is that not necessarily, because again, this would 96160 or 96161 are not specific necessarily to food insecurity screening, they're health risk assessment. So that whole, again, no CPT represents the specificity of this well. The future would be that we could create CPT2, which might be able to represent food insecurity screening well, and that is a state because we really need to develop quality metrics regarding food insecurity screening to be able to get those built. So we're kind of in the early stages of that, but that is a very clear idea. In fact, Dr. Caroline Fichtenberg and I were working on that a couple years ago. But if you were using a Prepare tool or the Accountable Health Communities tool, you would be just dropping one of those codes once. And again, I'm not a certified coder, so anything I say here has to be under caveat. There's many people who might be better able to answer that. And then Caroline Fichtenberg asked, can you explain a little bit more the implications of letting professional CPT go? It just means that we would not include case management and care management CPT as an intervention, because if we do that, we will also have to logically include other CPT for other professions that are equally specific, which include every touch of a clinician. Does that answer your question?
Hi, yes, it does. Thank you, Sarah.
Did the question, I forget who asked the question up above. So Mr. Mossman, did that answer your question? Understanding that I'm not a professional coder.
Yes, it did. So if we're interested in being eventually in future state getting to that level of specificity, again, I worry that whether you're using another screener or if you're just screening for a range of domains, that you might be in a position to need to code for everything that you're screening for. But that's sort of, I guess that's down the road ways and also not specific.
Yeah. So the good thing is that, NQF, so regarding the quality metrics and possible CPT2 codes, which could be very specific, like I screened for food insecurity and it was negative, I screened for food insecurity and it was positive, and I screened for food insecurity and it was positive and I intervened. And that's kind of the way that food insecurity, the CPT2 are used in other settings. That could all be built off of the NQF food insecurity quality measurement initiative that's starting right now. So hopefully that won't be too long. That's happening in conjunction. And I actually sit on that TEP too. So hopefully we'll all be in alignment with the goals that we're building here in Gravity of being correlating directly to the quality measurements and quality measures through NQF, and then being able to be built into CPT2. That's the dream. That's more like phase 2 though. And Lucy asked, if CPT codes are dropped, how would activity result in payment? I guess I don't know if I understand. Lucy, do you, Lucy, do you want to get unmuted so you can help us understand the question?
Yeah, in a fee-for-service environment where every activity is potentially billable, I guess I'm wondering and looking for help. My basic understanding is that CPT codes are the basis or the beginning of bills. So
yes, yeah.
So if we drop them, does that have implications for payment? And if so, what are the implications for people doing the activity that we want them to do if they don't see, or if somebody tells them that there are no CPT codes at issue? How will we get reimbursement?
So that is so I think what we're saying, I need to clarify the statement and the request. So when I use the word drop, right, I simply mean from the set of data that we're proposing within this data set and put an eventual value set.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so we thinking about the data that would answer that an intervention for food insecurity happened here, right? Because what we are responsible for in this initiative is creating a data set that has value and has meaning. And these are questions that we ask ourselves continually across every choice point. And there's many, we're going to discuss other choice points as we go on. And so certainly billing will still have to happen, right? And services rendered, there's another, Maria Moen raises CPT codes are not just for billing, that is the primary goal, and they do track services provided, and that's all very important. So I don't want to seem to say that we're not talking about CPT for professional services not being significant. It's more, do they answer the question, is something significant happening for food insecurity specifically the way we need them to? And if we're including case management and care management, then we'd have to include everything, right? And do we want to do that, or do we just want to limit the CPT within our data set and value set to the CPT that represents the screening activity, which is the most specific thing we have? It's still not specific, but it's more specific than a general care or case management code or an evaluation and management code.
That's very helpful given our scope of work, but the last chat here seems to, I don't know whether it's a red flag or not, but I think we need to talk about that as well.
You mean the Marion
Yes,
Burger?
yes.
This is all the same concept. So the CPT codes will always be there in our work and in our activity. The question is whether or not the existence of an evaluation and management CPT is an answer to this question of whether something happened for food insecurity. And if it is, if we agree that it is, then we just have a lot more work to do because there's many more CPT that apply than what we currently have in our set.
Well, if we don't do it, then we're leaving it to the EDGE system to decide how to apply CPT codes to what we eventually come out with. Is that a fair conclusion?
I can chime in, Sarah. So this is actually a great conversation, and thank you, Lucy, for bringing it up. This is what we will need to include, as we've always talked about overall deliverables for this project. Based on what feedback we get from all our participants, we'll have to put together a recommendations report. And as Sarah's noted, if the community comes back and says we need to address this is another layer of work. So it's something that we would have to include in our recommendations report and then determine whether we need to establish another level or another subgroup. You know, these are all activities that will take more time and more resources, and so we'll need more focus. So this is an opportunity where if you all bring back feedback that this is needed, right now, as again, following Sarah's guidance, this will be a lot more work for the community, but if you all feel that it's needed, then we have to take note.
There's a comment from Donna Rugg, which probably does a better job saying what I saying. So Donna, do you want to unmute yourself and just offer your wisdom to the group for a second?
Sure. This is Donna. Can you hear me? I think you're keeping the CPT codes that are focused, like 9616061, more on the evaluation and the food insecurity screening is your best bet, because as you indicated, if you start expanding to the case management, even though they may do that in their process or the providers in their office visit, it's also including a lot of other stuff. So if you add the E&M codes that the providers use in their office, there's no way to pull out what was focused on food insecurity discussion and or screening versus what was focused on what they came in to see the physician for instance, a diagnostic issue. So I personally think your data would be better if it was more focused. These aren't perfect codes. As we've found through the various classification and coding systems, there isn't necessarily, we have to work with what we have or propose something to the future. But you can still use CPT codes. We just may not use them in our.
This is Al from ONC. I had a kind of a comment on this thread. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes.
So there's the comment about not being able to say specifically what the screening was done. I think an E&M code, any procedure code, professional services code could be augmented by the presence of the screening instrument results itself. So the low-ink code for the panel that you did. So that combined with an E&M code, as long as you're not doing specifically isolated case management for social determinants or specifically for food insecurity, it seems like that would capture a regular, quote-unquote, regular E&M code along with the low-ink codes for as a test done during the encounter.
So the link in that sense functions just like the screening CPT or the ICD, where it's the representation of the specificity, right? So it's the pairing and the coupling that create the meaning.
I mean, and that's actually for documentation and validation purposes. It's needed anyhow. You have to, if you make a diagnosis, you have to have the background. You have to have the support in the note or the bill. How you got to that point. You did some screening tests that resulted in some diagnosis, which is done during an encounter, which is represented by the encounter code.
So for the sake of time, I'm wondering the best way to proceed from the community. First of all, this has been a really wonderful conversation. It's lovely to tap the wisdom of all of the individuals who present for this call every week. So I have a question. So after the internal team reviewed all the comments from the community, our suggestion time to focus just on these codes for now as the recommendations for going forward, just understanding the work to be required. And if that, should we proceed with asking folks to comment via email if they have concerns about that, just for the sake of time, now that we have had these comments? Does that seem like a good way to go forward? Okay, so I have a few folks saying yes. So we've had some really lovely conversation. I think the important thing is that we all understand these choice points better collectively, and that's kind of what this presentation is really about, is making sure we're all on the same page. So the complexity of the CPT issue is this, right? That if you add one kind, you have to add all the similar kinds, and so it gets complex really quick. So the suggestion from the core team was focusing simply on this screening CPT for now. And if there's any critical concerns about that, please send us an email. And then understand, and this is again in reference to a lovely thought from the comment, that CPT2 is coming soon, hopefully, and that will help greatly. Thank you for the lovely conversation. It was really wonderful. Now going on, we already did the questions thing. So this is the next section. It's basically us trying to fold in comments on the end-to-end review into decisions we've made prior. Because what we noticed is that many of the comments we were getting were representative material and choice points we've made in calls, like going all the way back to July. So we thought it'd be helpful to get everybody on the same page and have everybody be able to add commentary so that we can collectively come to consensus truly. So we've made decisions on, as we've gone through, on what is to be included and excluded from the data set. We collectively have made decisions about how the data should be named, defined, and structured. New members have posed so many good questions, as I said, that we really want to summarize previous decision points while referencing current end-to-end review comments. On each slide, a comment in response to comments made during the end-to-end review is referenced by a star. So I just want to basically go back to what we're calling the working definition for gravity. So a couple weeks ago, we presented on the work of refining the food insecurity definition to be person level and computable. This is a work in progress, and it's important to touch base on it because it kind of sets the ground for where we're going. We do want to admit and acknowledge that this is a different definition that's on the Confluence page, so please don't be too confused, because we're working to change our definition collectively. We do have a lot of background work to do with some external subject matter experts, but we do hope to bring this definition back to the community in the week forward and next week. And the definition is as stands. Food insecurity is uncertain, limited, or unstable access to food that is sufficient in quantity, adequate in nutritional quality, culturally acceptable, safe, and acquired in socially acceptable ways. And we'll come back to it soon. We also felt like it was important just to clarify again the difference between food insecurity versus food deserts, because we've had lots of conversations about access and how it plays into food insecurity. What makes food insecurity different than a food desert or a community vegetables or resources is one person's or the individual's ability to acquire what they need outside of that community. So you can have an individual living in a food insecure community that has limited resources, but they can travel to an external community, or they can order in from an external community the resources they need. And so hypothetically, they could be living in a community that is food insecure, but individually be food secure themselves. So it's the individual person's ability to acquire food, not the existence around them, which separates food insecurity versus food deserts. Any questions on this slide? It's a little complex. I tried to create a visual to represent something I hadn't seen before, and we can always circle back. So this is the first view of it. So when we were reviewing screening choice points, these are the questions and the decisions that we made. So we decided that screeners must be standardized. We just realized that validated is difficult, and so it wasn't required, but most of the tools that we have submitted actually are validated. We wanted them to be a conceptual match, which is they have to screen for food insecurity, not food deserts, not malnutrition. And the primary question must allow differentiation of food insecurity. So food insecurity, yes, versus food insecurity, no. An example of what was not included were questions of financial strain. The Cardia tool is a really good example because the first question is, how hard is it for you to pay for the very basics like food, housing, medical care, and heating? And you get a difficulty answer, but it doesn't necessarily point to the person being food insecure. So they could be having a difficulty paying for medical care or some other concept and not food, and you wouldn't know. So we did not include that in the value set. And if that's concerning, again, please let us know because in the comments and in emails, and we'll look at that again. We realized it was acceptable to include tools from other countries, and you can see that in the inclusion of the Canadian Food Security module. It was very important to include facets of comprehensive screeners that are relevant to food insecurity with the understanding that the whole tool would have to be built. We did get a question on this because of the inclusion of the food question within Prepare. If you isolate out that question, whether you were unable to get food, it is absolutely a question that represents food insecurity. The whole tool is comprehensive and is already built into LOINC, but the question and answer for that one element is a sufficient screen for food insecurity. We did also get some questions about duplication, and we realized that when you look at the screener data set, there's just a lot of repetition, and that's because we included every whole panel that applied to food insecurity. The USDA has a lot of panels. There's the USDA the whole 18 item, there's the 10 item, there's the adolescent screener, and they repeat many of the same questions. So it's important to note a question could be repeated across each of those USDA panels, and those first two questions of the USDA panel is repeated also in the hunger vital sign, and the questions of the USDA panel are also replicated in very similar fashion in the Canadian Food Security module, but they're not duplicated within the panel itself. So by allowing the build of each of those different panels, it allows for the deployment of similar panels in different settings for different reasons that are validated for different reasons. Like you can use the adolescent panel for adolescents, and you can use the adult panel for adults. But even though the questions are similar. So that's why you're going to be seeing similar questions repeated over and over and over screening summary page, because those are the duplications of those questions across the different panel recommendations. Lucy has a question about whether in the previous slide, I'm just going to go back really quick, whether it's beneficial to say household versus family. I just use household because it's the way that the USDA talks about it, but they are because who you live with is not always who you're related to. So that was the way it's measured for the USDA is everybody who lives in a setting. All right, so moving on so that was a summary of the screening choice points that we made, and we've referenced a couple of the questions that we got in the comments and email in this presentation so far. And then the next slide goes into goal choice points. So how did we decide if a goal was in the set? It must be relevant to the domain, and it had to be measurable. And this is why we went with severity, decreased severity of food insecurity, because you can measure severity by either the US Canadian Food Security modules, the HFA IAS, or the FICE screener. So you can accurately, standardized, measure a decrease of severity by using a certain tool, and so therefore that goal was measurable, and therefore it was included. We're going to talk more about food security severity in a little bit. It's a pretty complex topic, but that goal was on our goal summary page. Now on to diagnoses choice points, and there were a couple questions in the comments regarding this kind of information. So how did we decide if a diagnosis was in the set? must be relevant to the domain. This one's important because there's some slight stretches that we had to think about really carefully. So we decided it had to be conceptually related to food insecurity. Therefore, if we decided it was okay to stay in the set, if it was not food insecurity, then the concept had to be close enough. You could not have it present without being food insecure as well. So therefore, it might reference a different concept, but it was so close they were intertwined. For example, nutrition impaired due to limited access to healthy foods, which necessarily implies that that person did not have the individual capacity to rectify their own access issues. And then patients' noncompliance with dietary regimen due to financial hardship, which is, even though it's a compliance concept, it's a compliance concept which is directly linked to the concept of food insecurity, and so we let it stay. And yes, this is so, I don't know the first name, but Nicholas referenced the use of the term household is important for someone in the populations who's doubling up or having other housing situations. And this is where the social risk overlay, the household, by having the definition of household versus family, it defines everyone who's experiencing economic drivers collectively, even if they're not related. And you can then overlay housing instability and risks on top of that. Thank you. So it's important to note that initially we did not include severity and temporal features, and we'll describe why, and there's going to be more of that in the presentation, but we're reconsidering that based on some of our comments, and we want to include you in that. I just wanted to summarize again, because of the questions on diagnoses, the concepts that are on the submission. So far we have insufficient food supply and food insecurity, nutrition impaired due to limited access to healthful foods, and nutrition impaired due to limited access to nutrition-related supplies. We answered some complexities regarding this last one on a previous phone call, on a previous meeting. And then we have the existing ICD-10-CM, which is lack of adequate food and safe drinking water. We also include the proposed ICD-10-CM that the Blue Cross Blue Shield and I proposed in March, which includes lack of adequate food insecurity, and that patient's noncompliance with dietary regimen secondary to financial hardship. We did have a question in our comments regarding the differentiation of that adequate food from food insecurity. We walked through this a couple weeks ago, but I wanted to reference this again. So currently in international ICD, there's two concepts, one of inadequate drinking water supply and one of lack of adequate food. In US use, in ICD-10-CM, they're combined into lack of adequate food and safe drinking water. So what we proposed is to break them open again, both to allow for folks who are addressing water concepts to have a specific code, and to mirror the international ICD-10. Lack of adequate food is not very well defined. There is no clear definition. Food insecurity can be considered a very specific child of a general concept of lack of adequate food. This is a question from Alia. In some definitions surrounding food insecurity, the word diet is used. With diet, I would also consider water availability key to maintaining a dietary regimen. Is this too far from food insecurity to include? I don't even know. So Donna, what are your thoughts on that? I imagine that water as a resource could possibly, I've never actually even thought of that before. Donna, do you want to chime in?
Yeah, so I would stay with keeping them separate, would be my thinking. Certainly it's an integral part of someone's intake, but I think because we're trying to stay as closely aligned to food insecurity as possible, then I think we should consider those two items separate.
And we certainly do in the literature, but I just want to honor the fact that your question is very valid, right? That is difficult to consider water security and food insecurity as very separate from each other, but in the definitions as they stand, they are. So I'm going to continue. So I just wanted to touch base again on the continuum of food insecurity. So as defined by some early studies in the early 1990s, there's a continuum of food insecurity that starts with worry about not having enough food, to decrease in quality of food, to reductions in portion sizes, to skipping meals, to not eating for 1 or more days. And this continuum experience of food insecurity is common across cultures. It's the common core of the USDA metrics and the Canadian metrics and the international metrics of the HFIS and FICE. So this represents, it's a complex slide, but I made this slide to represent why we dropped concerns of severity in our initial data recommendations. This is again an answer to one of the questions we had in our submission review. We did get submission recommendations that included severity concepts, but in our definition work, it became clear that there really is some uncertainty about the spectrum of food insecurity and how it relates to naming food insecurity severity. And I'm going to walk you through that right now. So the top line up in the top here is food insecurity as it's measured by the USDA, operationalized with the US Food Security Module. So, and then the bottom line is food insecurity based on the World Health Organization FIES tool. I've matched them because if you look at the USDA Food Security Module, they define someone as marginally insecure if they have a presence only of uncertainty about having enough food. But within the FICE tool, uncertainty is seen on a spectrum, so it could either be mild food insecurity or it could be food security, depending. And then as you go along the spectrum, the differences dissolve because there is great correlation between the food insecurity as seen by the USDA and food insecurity as seen by the FAIS when you look into effects on quality and variety. And then in severity, you have very distinct effects on quantity. So everyone agrees that if you are running out of food, going an entire day without eating, that you have severe food insecurity. We agree that if you have effects on quality and variety, then you have moderate food insecurity. What we don't agree on within the USDA and FIES is how to define the break within the spectrum there. So the food security module makes a clear break and says that if you have just uncertainty, you're marginally food secure. And again, the FIES has a little bit of gray. So this is what led us to initially pausing on building in codes to represent severity. There's another layer that I almost forgot to mention, which is as measured by the USDA tool as well. They don't use the term moderate food insecurity or severe food insecurity within the annual report on food insecurity in the US. They determine it on a food security spectrum. So even in conversation and publications from the USDA, although they talk about moderate food insecurity and severe food insecurity, the terms they use within the USDA module studies are low food security and very low food security. So very low food security is a correlate to severe food insecurity, and moderate food insecurity is a correlate to low food security. So this, again, the morass of all this is why we paused, because having a food insecurity code itself is such a great step. We thought maybe the community, as we're working through things like diagnostic criteria, would catch up in a bit, and then we could build in these severity codes. However, very insightful comments that gave us pause. I think it was it was Dr. Myers from LA who was asking how they would then represent a severity of need and define risk, right? So that made us question again whether or not we wanted to consider food insecurity severity concepts. On top of food insecurity severity concepts, there's temporal concepts, and they're going to be on the next slide, because the questions from Dr. Myers surrounded both. So in addition to severity concepts, there's also temporal factors with food insecurity that need to be considered. There's a chronic food insecurity, which is long-term and persistent, which means you're not able to meet minimum food requirements over an extended period of time. There's seasonal or recurrent transitory food insecurity, which is predictable, A cyclical pattern of inadequate availability and access to food. It's associated with seasonal fluctuations in the climate, crop patterns, work opportunities, et cetera, and disease patterns. And there's transitory, which is short-term and temporary, which is a sudden drop in the ability to produce or access enough food to maintain a good nutritional status. So when we think about classifying food insecurity, we have severity concepts of mild, moderate, and severe, and we have temporal factors of chronic, seasonal, and transitory. And again, walked back from all these specificities in our initial recommendations because it's pretty complex, but we were questioning whether that's appropriate and want to bring it back to you. We need to consider the literature that I've displayed in the previous slides in order to go forward. So the question is this: although there's a lack of consistency on the mild side of the spectrum, so the FICE tool might say that uncertainty is food insecurity, and as defined operationally by the USDA food security module, uncertainty alone is marginal food security. There's great consensus on what defines moderate food insecurity and severe food insecurity. So at this time, our question to the community is, are these codes needed to proceed with building at this time? Are they needed enough? So the question was from Dr. Myers was, these codes were desired, so in the clinic we could accurately assess severity and leverage our interventions according to represented risk. And now, thoughts. Anyone have thoughts on that?
Sarah, this is Lisa. Is the question a choice point of how deep do we need to go? So you're giving the community the option. You're saying, first of all, we know we can make a diagnosis that represents food insecurity. Is that sufficient for the use cases that we need to prove out, where we can now share coded diagnosis information, have computers be able to use codes to detect when the problem list includes a diagnosis of food insecurity? Will that level of discrete coding be sufficient for us to make progress on some of the things that we want to test out? Or do we need to go to that level deeper of knowing if the severity of the food insecurity is mild, moderate, or severe in order to test out our use cases?
Yeah, that's a very good way of stating the question, because we sidestepped this because it's complex, but we got enough questions from the community that it made us reconsider, because we don't want to not suggest something that's necessary. So although there's uncertainty on one side of the spectrum, the idea from Dr. Myers is really representing the most acute risk, of which there's great consensus on. So if we say severe food insecurity, there isn't a question about what we mean, right? So if a family or a person does not have food at home, they have severe food insecurity, and there's no question to that. Now, if we should proceed, if it's necessary to proceed with recommendations for that concept at this time. And we have Dylan, for our analytic and reporting purposes, the fact that a member is food insecure is enough to get intervention started. However, future state for predictive modeling, it would be helpful to be able to correlate other SDOH with level of food insecurity. It's true. We do recognize it would be helpful. I think the idea is whether or not we feel like it's necessary for this initial build, and there's very good cases why it would be. There was actually recommendations a few months ago on trying to assess risk, right? And one of our cautions at that time, wanting to make sure that risk was aligned with the literature. And this is risk that's aligned with the literature. So this is a list of, I can also imagine that for future quality measurement, it could matter, since the evidence for effectiveness of certain interventions could vary based on the basis of food insecurity severity. That's also true. It would also be beneficial from a necessity of intervention standpoint. Like if you are at a point where you're trying to triage resources, if a community is suddenly screening universally for food insecurity and trying to leverage what resources go where, right? The severity of food insecurity would certainly be would assist in that. This is Lori Peterson, agreed. The categories of agreeing, I'm assuming to the beneficial comment, the categories of chronic, temporal, and cyclical are more actionable to identify the type and frequency of social interventions. Here's Dr. Myers. So this is the central issue is the real on the ground actions that are driven by these diagnoses. And I see significant advantage in knowing this differentiations. It drives much different care planning, and we agree, and follow-up, and that is true as well. I want to add that there is, I often conceptualize food insecurity as relating to depression just because it helps my mind. So the idea of severity being linked to temporality is, of course, seen within the depression world, right? Because you either have recurrent or you have single episode, and then you have severity as a descriptor as well. I think the idea is right now is to figure out which of these descriptors is really most important. So it seems should we proceed similarly to how we proceeded? We have 10 minutes left, and this is the only thing on the agenda.
Donna, this is Lisa again. Sorry, Sarah. I would say I'm rapidly scanning to pull up the some fire structures on allergy, but in the allergy space, the folks that deal with people's allergies look at both severity and criticality as another dimension, and they felt that it was very important to have both severity and criticality, and so if the community ends up being able to clearly define the difference between severity, the mild, moderate, severe, we know that we have that kind of modeled for us already, and then the temporality of being chronic, seasonally, transient, and transient, the definitions that you gave, if that's something that there's consensus on, we certainly have the ability in our testing of the FHIR models to be able to create and include a notion of temporality in the condition resource that we're going to have. If that's, you know, if that's where people feeling like this is what we really need to be able to land on to demonstrate kind of actionable interventions that we're going to be doing and whatever, this is definitely possible.
Thank you, Lisa. And okay, so what I can do is I feel like most people representing this seems like a good direction to go. So I've already started mapping out what that might look like in code recommendations if we did both the severity and the temporality elements. We would have to allow for an unspecified code that would allow the user that does not want to drill down on any of these things to just drop a code in and move on. Similarly to, again, to depression. But what about if I craft that kind of mapping out of all these elements and then bring it back to the next meeting?
Mm-hmm.
Plan?
Mm-hmm.
All right. It's really lovely to have the seminar format. I'm really, I'm really enjoying the exchange of information and knowledge that everyone's brought to the table today. We have covered a lot. I think that's actually, oh, we have to review the intervention choice points. So I think I have enough time, 9 minutes to go forward. We're moving right along. Just to lastly summarize the intervention choice points we've made up until now. Again, we decided they must be relevant to the domain. All concepts were reduced to the most general term to create a parent code. We do want to add that if there was enough community consensus to have a child code, we added it. An example of this is in the beginning, FDIPR, which is a federal disbursement of food to Native American reservations, was not included because it was deemed as too narrow and folded into the concept of food pantry. However, when 3 separate submissions requested it, it was deemed necessary, so it was entered in as a child. So you have your parent concept of food pantry, and then FDIPR is a child of it. We want to also note that intervention framework, that we collectively created formed the core structures of the build, and each concept was tested against each program or role name for fit. So we basically would have a program suggested, like Community Action Agency was a suggestion, and we would test that concept into the intervention to see that which interventions were a conceptual fit for that program and which weren't. For example, evaluation of eligibility was only entered for programs that were and for programs that don't. And I wanted to include that only because we have some upcoming conversations that came through one of our questions on definitions as well. So we might circle back on some updates to the definitions after we talk to some community members. We have a meeting on Friday. We wanted to add one last bit of feedback from screening, which is not about the end-to-end review. It's just about Regenstrief being very kind and Sarah being proactive. So as Sarah Armstrong from Regenstrief did a preliminary review of our screening summary report to identify the current status of these tools related to inclusion, and included identifying which tools may be proprietary and that would require author permission for inclusion. So that's some initial work. And noting that the Seek tool is already scheduled for the December link release, so that doesn't have to be asked for build because it's already being built. I think we're set. Any questions on the amount of information we've gone over today? Again, very appreciative. It was a really lovely conversation. So I have some action items bringing back to the community the mapping out of possible diagnoses based on our ideas of going forward with severity and temporal features. We want email comments from folks continuing on the end-to-end review, but also specifically on if you do not agree with the idea to go forward just with the CPT relevant to the screening activities at this time. And we're not doing fire, so that's the end. Any other thoughts before we close out the meeting?
Lynette, can we remind everyone what their homework is?
Is that on the last slide?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I have to.
In addition to collecting a lot of candy and treats.
Yeah.
We're going to show the page.
Yes, I can also show the
Thank
gravity
you.
landing page.
See, Evelyn included that in the chat as well. So up at the top of the chat, she gave a link to it.
Evelyn provided that link. Like I said earlier, we will accept comments on all of the data elements, screening, diagnosis and goals, and interventions through November 7th. We realize everyone is busy. It's only going to get busier. So we're hoping that if you did have some thoughts or feedback that you wanted to provide and you were afraid it was late, don't feel like it's late. Go ahead and send it. We will appreciate it. And I am capturing all the chats right now as we speak. So there's a Connect-a-thon event coming up in Q2 of 2020. We don't have an exact date yet, but if you are interested in participating in that, please do go to this link or the Confluence site. You can sign up on the Confluence through this link to participate in that, and we will reach back out to you if you have any questions. And then, Sarah, if you want to push the ball over to me, I can super quick show everybody the gravity landing page.
Done.
I think you probably want to drag and drop the ball onto EMI Advisors.
How do I do? Okay.
Just click on it and pull it up.
Oh,
you see the ball over there by your name?
Got it.
In the attendance list.
Where is the advisors?
I may be alphabetical.
There we go. Okay, gotcha.
Okay. You may be able to right click on EMI Advisor. Ah, there I am. Okay.
Sorry, this is the rural farmer girl having to.
Quite all right. Apparently there are two of us. Okay.
Do you want me to do it?
Yes, if you don't mind, if you can just real quick pull it up.
Can anyone, I'm going to try to go, so excuse me as
Pull the ball back over.
I will pull the ball back over.
This is why I never played ball in school.
Alrighty, I'm going to got the ball back.
Okay.
Alrighty, hello, and now you get to go. No commenting on the number of tabs. I'm just this is so this is.
We'll avert our eyes.
Yes, please avert my eyes, and you can see there's all kinds of nursing things.
Oh, you're not sharing. Sorry, Sarah, you're not sharing it. We don't see it.
Oh, okay, there we go. Well, you're about to see all of my. There we go. Okay.
Okay. All right.
So,
okay, I can talk through this if you want me to.
That sounds great.
This is our landing page for Gravity. This is the link that, well, this is the landing page. We send out embedded links from this space to you all each time we send out a follow-up email. So you typically get links that take you directly to a specific place in this Confluence space. But over here on the right, you'll see there are quick links, and you can access past meeting presentations and recordings. You can access the member list. You can join the project. You can look at the meeting schedule. You can look at the use case package, and you can look at data elements, submission templates, and instructions. And just as a side note, we will be accepting housing data elements anytime you want to start submitting those. But this is where all things Gravity live. And over on the left-hand side, you'll see under the page tree, you'll see up at the top there's Gravity Project. That will always take you to the home page. And then if you scroll down a little bit just on this left-hand navigation rail, you'll see Page Tree, and that's where all the pages inside the space live. And if there's a caret beside the line, it means that there are pages. So you can click on that little caret and it will fold out all the other choices for you.
So here's like the food insecurity domain base page.
And this is where all the homework is. And so you've probably seen this come through because it just dumps you right on this table. Are there any questions? Okay, excellent. So look for emails from us, a follow-up email after this meeting. We typically send them out on Fridays. Sometimes it's a little bit late, but typically they come out on Fridays. If you haven't seen emails from us before, do go to the Confluence and join the project. And with that, unless there are any last-minute thoughts, we will adjourn.
Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Sarah. Awesome job.